Hi everyone, my name is Marika and welcome to my true crime series, Dark Deception. It's Dark Deception, so it probably should not have this colorful, happy introduction, but cool. So I don't want to give any spoilers and I want to go into the case right away, so let's talk about Sheku Bayoh. Quote, I still do not know why my brother died 5 years ago. That's a disgrace. Unquote. Sheku Bayoh's sister urges focus on racism, not statues. Katie Johnson, whose brother Sheku Bayoh died after being restrained by police in Kirkcaldy, Scotland in 2015, believes race played a role in his death and he would not have died if he was a white man. She said there were striking similarities between the case and that of George Floyd, the 46-year-old black man whose death in Minneapolis sparked anti-racism demonstrations around the world. So, the town of Kirkcaldy in Fife lies on Scotland's east coast. It has a population of 60,000 people, and like much of Scotland's industrial heartlands, has suffered economic decline in recent decades. 1 in 5 families there live in poverty, and it is far from ethnically diverse. The 2011 census showed more than 97% of the town's residents were white and just 1% black. This was the town that Katie chose to make her home 2 decades ago. So, originally from Sierra Leone, West Africa, she had settled in the UK in the 1990s. She moved from Coventry to Kirkcaldy to study nursing. Katie says she was so taken with how beautiful and safe Scotland was. She suggested her younger brother Sheku joined her. Sheku Ahmed Tayan Bayoh, his full name, was said to be a loving, kind, and caring gentleman by his partner Colette Bell. He had been living in South London since 1995 when he arrived as a 12-year-old unaccompanied minor seeking to escape the civil war in the country of his birth. Sheku was not especially academic, so he was keen to leave school and get into the real world, and jumped at the chance to move north. He arrived in Kirkcaldy in 2000, aged 17, ready to start his new life. A number of jobs beckoned, including an apprenticeship with Fife Council and a position in the local branch of DIY chain B&Q. He was involved in a community, a youth leader with a local racial awareness group. He even gave talks to the local police about the issues faced by the minority ethnic youth of Kirkcaldy. Sheku was granted the right to live in the UK permanently in 2008. By 2015, he was a trainee gas fitter with Scottish Gas. He had settled down with his partner Colette, and Katie said he'd been over the moon when the baby Isaac was born. He also had another son, Tyler, from a previous relationship, whom he saw regularly. He just lived for his children, really, Katie said. The short time he had with Isaac was, I'm sure it was his best time. He enjoyed every moment of being a father, unquote. But Katie's decision to send for her brother all those years ago now haunts her. That is the guilt that will live with me until the day I die, she says. So, Katie Johnson, a nurse at the local hospital in the town of Kirkcaldy, was going about her day. It's like any other case, it was just a normal day. She didn't have a shift at the hospital that day, but she has been working as a part-time home carer and had been to see a local client. She was tired and decided to go back into her pajamas. At about 15 o'clock, she was in the kitchen chatting and preparing food with a relative when the doorbell rang. Her husband, Eddie, answered. 2 detectives were at the door. They had information about her brother. Sheku, they told her, had died that morning. I had just seen him the night before at a family party for my daughter's birthday. He was well, he was fine. I was shocked. But the officers wouldn't tell me anything about what happened. At first, they told me he'd been found on the ground. Then they said they were looking for 2 men. Eventually, after talking to their boss, they told me there had been a forceful arrest and he died on the way to the hospital. We just couldn't get the straight answer from them. That's what Katie said. And answers are what Katie has been looking for the past 5 years. She had been at the forefront of a high-profile campaign to establish the truth around the circumstances of Sheku's death at the hands of police officers. So how did this happen? On the day he died, the father of 2 had been at his close friend's house, Martin Dick, in the morning watching a boxing match. They had known each other since 2006. We'd had a lot of things in common, just really bounced off each other, enjoyed each other's company. It was hard not to be attracted to his personality. He was a real people person, to be honest. I've described him before as a friend to everyone. His accent was unique. A broad mixture of Scottish slang, London, and a bit of African as well. It was like nothing else I've ever heard. It was one of the most unique things about him. That's what his close friend, Martin, said. Martin says Sheku was known to walk away from fights and did not have a reputation for violence. I never saw him raise his voice, let alone his hands, he said. He was just not that kind of guy. He would never let his temper flare or anything like that. That wasn't his nature at all. Martin was also one of the last people to see Sheku alive. He said he knew that Sheku occasionally used recreational drugs and thought he probably had taken something when Sheku arrived at his house early on the morning of 3rd of May to watch a boxing match. He wasn't himself, he just seemed confused and the atmosphere was strange because we couldn't get through him, so he decided it would be better for him to leave and he said sorry. I thought he's going to go home and everything will be fine tomorrow. This is all what Martin said. So toxicology reports would later show that Sheku had taken MDMA and another hallucinogenic drug called flakka. Sheku walked the few streets to his own house, escorted by another friend, but then his behavior was dramatically altered by the drugs he'd taken. He then attacked his friend, and the friend left. He was like, yo, you need to chill, and I don't want to be in a fight with you, you're my friend, so he just left, which, that's not what he said, but that's what I think he probably said. Honestly, I understand why he left. It could be dangerous, especially when someone's on drugs. But if he didn't leave Sheku, do you think maybe this wouldn't have happened? We will never know. So just before 7 a.m., Sheku took a knife from his kitchen and went outside. It was at this point, worried residents saw him wandering the streets and called 999, which is like 911 for Scotland. It set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to his death. He walked an approximate distance of half a mile down to Heyyy Road. Mr. Bayoh was restrained by up to 9 officers in the street near his Kirkcaldy home on the 3rd of May 2015. At 7:15 a.m., police were responding to reports of a black man disoriented, wandering, acting erratically, looks like he could be drunk or high on drugs, walking down the street and carrying a knife. 6 police vehicles were dispatched, yet no knife or any weapons were found on Mr. Bayoh, although 1 knife was later found nearby. He was on the ground within 45 seconds of coming into contact with police and was restrained using handcuffs, leg strains, CS spray, which is tear gas, that people use at protests now. Not people, I mean police. Pepper spray and batons. At one point, officers thought their colleagues may have been attacked by Mr. Bayoh. In fact, they just had been hit by gas which they had sprayed and which had blown back in their faces, so Karma does exist, y'all. Sheku was in prone position, face down. He loses consciousness and stops breathing. This was just a few minutes after he had been in contact with the police. CPR was attempted. He's taken by ambulance 3 minutes later to Victoria Hospital, where he was still handcuffed with leg restraints in place, which obviously the doctors demanded the removal of. The doctors tried desperately, but sadly he is announced dead, not pronounced, at 9:04 a.m. He is at the same hospital his sister Katie worked at. Sheku suffered 23 separate injuries. 23 by police officers. A post-mortem found Mr. Bayoh was covered in cuts and bruises, had a broken rib, and had... Oh no, I swear, I listened to this word on Google Translate already and I still can't say it.
Petechial hemorrhages.
Also, like, why is she speaking so slow? Like, petechial hemorrhages. Yeah, so he had petechial hemorrhages in his eyes, a sign of asphyxiation. It was also established he had taken the drugs Flakka and MDMA, as mentioned earlier. I just want to say, for those of you who don't know, Flakka is a combination of heroin and crack cocaine, or heroin and methamphetamines. And MDMA is commonly known as ecstasy or Molly. And actually, a fun fact, did you know? MDMA is an empathogen, which means it increases an individual's feelings of empathy and compassion towards others. And this is actually being used to treat PTSD, especially for veterans. This is really interesting. I actually have a video in the description telling you more about this. So, back to the story. A report by a renowned pathologist engaged by the Bayoh's family is expected to say the cause of death was positional asphyxia, effectively being suffocated as a result of the position his body was in. Positional asphyxia is a common cause of death in police custody where restraint is involved. Police took several hours before telling Bayoh's family that he was dead, despite interviewing them for several hours. The family said they felt like they were being treated like criminals. Police went to the house of his partner Colette and took her to Kirkcaldy police station. Anwar said before leaving they took her house keys of her. Like, why? Their explanation was that it was a crime scene. The family alleged that Police Scotland gave them 5 different versions of events over the course of 7 hours, which is a matter of grave concern. The family solicitor, by the way, he's like so amazing. He does such great things for them, but even for other families. Like, no wonder he's one of the best solicitors out there. He said that in the 11 weeks since Sheku's death, there had been a, quote, deliberate attempt to paint disturbing images of violence, unquote, that journalists had been briefed off the record, and that there had been character assassinations and rumors. And he highlighted these 6 questions for the investigation. First, Sheku was a fit and healthy man who stopped breathing less than 3.5 minutes after being engaged by police. 2, was the level of force used on Sheku Bayoh reasonable and proportionate? 3, did the methods of restraint lead to positional asphyxiation? 4, were police guidelines or training regarding restraint, use of CS and pepper spray, and positional asphyxia sufficient and followed correctly? 5, who ordered police officers to systematically lie to Sheku's family over the course of the next 7 hours? And the last question, why did the police take control of Colette and Sheku's house under false pretenses? No one knows. All 9 officers returned to the police station and sat together in a canteen for up to 8 hours whilst failing to give statements to investigators for some 32 days. In the hours that followed, many lies were told, including that he had attacked a police officer with a knife. An internal police document written less than an hour after Bayoh's death, wow, so fast, said that police attended reports of a male with a machete in the street and that the male strikes one with machete. None of the officers saw Mr. Bayoh with a knife or machete, nor has there ever been any suggestions he struck one of them with a blade. Police did not respond to questions as to how misinformation like this got into an official police document. Deborah Coles from the charity Inquest, which investigates deaths in custody, has been supporting the Bayoh family. She told the program, quote, "The pattern that we've seen is that the state narrative is very often when somebody dies after restraint, there's an attempt to demonize or speak ill of the person who's died, to try and deflect attention away from the actions of the police officers concerned by painting a picture of a dangerous man carrying a machete," unquote. So days after Mr. Bayoh's death, the Scottish Police Federation, SPF, that's like the SPF on, sun cream, the SPF 15 or 50 and stuff. Interesting. Coincidence. SPF lawyer Peter Watson told the media that a petite female police officer was subjected to a violent and unprovoked attack by a very large man who punched, kicked, and stamped on her. The petite police officer was Constable Nicole Short. Her account of the day was recently included in a 2019 judicial ruling. She wanted to take early retirement on medical grounds since the incident. She has been on sick leave with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and she will be also mentioned later. Alan Patton, another officer involved in the incident, also applied to retire early on medical grounds. He was alleged to have had a violent and racist past. He was revealed to have made racist comments after his brother-in-law came forward. Yes, you go, brother-in-law. Even if you're family, you should call them out for being racist or being violent. Just because they're family doesn't mean you should protect them, especially when they did something wrong. So relatives alleged PC Alan Patton, I don't really care about him, who was one of the first officers on scene, had a history of assaulting his own parents and expressed racist views. Patton has denied the claims, of course. Mr. Swan, an engineer who is married to Patton's sister, said he out and out admitted that he was racist, that he hates them, as he puts it, all the blacks. It's not right he's a police officer. It is alleged that PC Patton, 41 years old, carried out a sustained attack on his own parents at their home in 2005 while he was off duty. The attack was said to have left his mother, Anne Patton, now 61, unconscious, and his father, John Patton, 65, severely bruised and battered. Police officers from the then 5 Constabulary were called to the incident, but I understand that his parents elected not to pursue a complaint after being assured by senior officers the matter would be dealt with internally. Signed statements obtained by the record also claim that Patton apparently badmouthed Sheku Bayoh in the weeks following his death. When asked if he was still working as a police officer, he allegedly told the source, "I'm not working just now. I've not worked since May. I'm trying to get out of the police since that incident with that black B 6 stars. I still don't know what that B and 6 stars is, but you can guess on your own. Sources also told how Patton wanted to join the racist far-right group, the BNP, as a teenager. So there's that police officer for you. Claude Bell, Bayoh's partner, has stated after hearing all this information, if somebody could beat up their own mom and dad, why are they then left with a badge? Why are they still allowed to patrol the streets? If they are that violent that they would hit at their own parents, what hope does any normal citizen have to go up against him? And I agree. She added, everything that we should have had together is now gone. He didn't even get a birthday card or his first Father's Day card from his son Isaac, and any anniversaries and birthdays coming up. I'm now thinking about what can I put down at a grave. The Bayoh family lawyer Amer Anwar said, I think the public have the right to expect that those who engage in violence and those who engage in racism should not be able to walk our streets as police officers. They must be held to account. You go, lawyer. Love him so much. He's so amazing. You can follow his Twitter. It's his name. I'll actually link it down below. Later, new evidence which was obtained by the BBC's disclosure program, including CCTV footage, cast doubt on some of the officers' accounts of the incident, and I will talk more detail about this later, but it's quite amazing. It took more than 4 years for the Crown Office to decide no one would be charged over the death. Police Scotland Chief Constable Livingstone met privately with Mr. Bayoh's family in December and expressed condolences over the death. This obviously didn't make the family happy. So, Justice Secretary Humza Yousaf announced in November 2019 that a full public inquiry would be held. He has now named Lord Bracadale as the inquiry's chairman. Lord Bracadale became a High Court judge in 2003 and presided over some of the most high-profile criminal trials in recent Scottish history before retiring in 2017. He was also one of the prosecutors during the Lockerbie bombing trial, which led to Abdelbaset Al-Megrahi being convicted in 2001. Mr. Yousaf said the former judge would bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the inquiry, which had been tasked with examining the circumstances surrounding Mr. Bayoh's deaths and the events that followed. The public inquiry was announced after it emerged that no police officers would face prosecution over Mr. Bayoh's death. Mr. Bayoh's family said they felt betrayed by the decision not to prosecute the officers involved, who have always denied any wrongdoing. The police chief, Mr. Livingstone, said he undertook that police would cooperate fully with a public inquiry into the death, the inquiry afterwards, and the question of whether race played a role. Ms. Johnson said, "We have had to wait for more than 5 years for a public inquiry into my brother's death, and that is disgraceful. My brother's died such a brutal death, and no one has been held to account." Speaking to the Sunday Post in November 2019, after it was revealed 55 months after Mr. Bayoh's death, no police officers would face prosecution, his partner Claude Bell said, "The amount of time it took to decide no one will be charged over Sheku's death has been unbelievable and unacceptable." Miss Bell, mother of Mr. Bayoh's son Isaac, who was 3 months old when his father died, said the justice system has done nothing but fail Sheku since the start. "I'm so angry about it and heartbroken about what happened to George Floyd," Claude told the Courier. "He deserves justice, but so does every black life taken by the police unjustly. What they did to George Floyd, they also did to Sheku Bayoh, but 5 years on, there is still no justice or peace." Colette said that she feels it's important to speak up about racism. However, she says it's frustrating that when it happens in Scotland or the UK, it gets little to no coverage, as though the problem does not exist. Bayoh's family solicitor Amer Anwar, a leading Scottish human rights lawyer, has welcomed the unprecedented and wide-ranging terms of reference for the Sheku Bayoh inquiry. However, while the relevance of race has yet to be determined in the Fife case, he too believes the Kirkcaldy and Minneapolis cases are a very fair comparison, which sadly underlines a wider endemic racism problem that persists in American and Scottish UK society. I appreciate there will be those who says it's not a fair comparison to make, Mr. Anwar told the Courier. He also said he truly hoped the inquiry would bring change, adding, ultimately, it is the barest minimum the system has offered and certainly is not justice. So there's another interview with Bayoh's sister, Katie Johnson. She said, no duty of care was given to him because he was a black man. That's how we feel. If he was a white man, I think things would have been handled differently. I have worked in the healthcare setting for a long time, and we have come across acting police officers dealing with white people who are high on drugs and alcohol, but they take extreme care and give them their own dignity. They didn't show my brother duty of care on that first instance when they met him. He had no criminal records, and Sheku had so many plans that he wanted to do with his children. All of it has been taken away, and there was no need for Sheku to have died that day. We just want to know how our brother died, that's all. Abe Johnson, Katie's husband, said Bayoh's death forced him and his family to move out of Kirkcaldy. The constant reminders of that day became unbearable. So, now let's talk about the previously unseen footage that reveals the moments before Bayoh's death. I will link it in the description if you want to see it. I don't want to put it here. It's your choice. Eric Baskind watched this CCTV footage, and he is a use of force expert. He said, so they get there, they screech to a halt. They get out of the cars with irritant sprays and batons. That to me doesn't seem measured. The CCTV appeared to show Sheku retailing and chasing a female officer, knocking her to the ground. The officer, later named as PC Nicole Short, as I mentioned above, had injuries consistent with being hit on the head. In her statement, she said, I felt an almighty blow to the back of my head. It knocked me flying towards the ground. I was in the fetal position. I thought, this is it. He's going to kill me. Mr. Baskind continued about the CCTV footage. What strikes me from the evidence of the officers is that they approached the scene with the intention of using force. Sheku is not running away. He's not, at the moment in time, creating a danger to anyone. They get there, and using the irritant sprays and batons, those actions were very escalatory. And once you ramp up things up to a certain degree, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to backtrack. Mr. Baskind said this could have been prevented if the officers had approached the situation differently in line with their training. What we can't rule out is that Mr. Bayoh is going through a mental health crisis, and from his perspective, he might have seen the discharge of the irritant sprays, the baton attacks, as him being attacked. Had they approached him with a different way, a calming way, to try and find out what was wrong, then in my view, Mr. Baskind's view, that attack may have been prevented. So officers gave statements to what happened that morning. He was overpowering us. He was massive and the biggest male I've ever seen. He stomped her on her back with his foot with a great deal of force. But Sheku wasn't even the biggest male there that day. Sheku was a muscular 5 foot 10 inch, weighing 12 stone 10 libras. LB. Officer A, anonymous obviously, to protect the police officers who beat an innocent man to death, was 6 foot 4 inch, of proportionate build, and Officer B was also 6 foot 4 inch and 25 stone. It was also claimed by the Scottish Police Federation that once Police Constable Nicole Short, was on the ground, Sheku viciously stamped on her. This was based on the testimony of Officers B and C. Officers C's statements said he stomped on her back with his foot with a great deal of force, as said above. He put his full body weight into the stomp and uses his arms to gain leverage. PC Short was taken to hospital for a checkup and returned to the police station shortly after. In her statement, PC Short did not say she was stamped on. There was no mention of it in the statements of 3 witnesses who saw the incident. The CCTV cast doubt on his claim. As soon as PC Short was knocked to the ground by Sheku, the action immediately moved elsewhere, and Sheku was confronted by the police officers, the other ones that came. Within 5 seconds, he was brought down, never to get back up. Mr. Baskin said, "The quality of the footage is not very good, but you can certainly make out what's going on, and I can see no evidence at all of 2 stamping attacks on the officer on the ground. There certainly seems to be a significant discrepancy between what I can see on the footage and what I've read in the papers." The BBC also obtained mobile phone footage of the restraint. Officer B told investigators he had Sheku pinned to the ground for a maximum of 30 seconds. Another officer said the restraint had been appropriate textbook stuff in line with their training. If textbook stuff was using irritant sprays and all this tear gas and batons to hit a man that you don't even know what's going on just after some 999 call, then I think the textbook stuff should be changed. A civilian witness saw it differently. She told investigators around 6 officers were lying across Sheku for several minutes. She said, "I heard him screaming. It sent chills through me. I heard the man shout to get the police off him. They never moved." 9 officers were involved at different times in the restraint, in which handcuffs and leg restraints were used, as mentioned above. And another female police officer, Officer E, used the word "colored," a term considered to be outdated and offensive to describe Sheku in her statement. She said, "As we approached, I was also thinking at that point of the Lee Rigby incident in London, mainly due to the fact of the colored male and the potential terrorist connotations. The UK terror threat level was at severe, as it had been for the previous 8 months. Eric Baskin told the BBC, "If they genuinely believed that they were coming into a terrorist incident, I would have expected them to have called that through control. No such call was made." Also later, a £1.85 million civil claim by the family against Police Scotland has been temporarily halted pending the inquiry. So back to the interview, the sister said, "It has made me lose faith in the police and the justice system as a whole. I don't think he would have died if he hadn't met the police. Police Scotland say they can't comment as the case is still ongoing." Yeah, and they expressed sympathy for the Bayoh family. And now I want to talk about the family solicitor, Anwar, and racism in Scotland, and basically not about him, but what he said about racism in Scotland, which I think is quite important for you to know, but if you don't want, then that is all for the case of Sheku Bayoh. So, the family lawyer said, "From the perspective of Sheku Bayoh's family and loved ones, Sheku is detained by up to 9 officers. He sustains multiple injuries. He's handcuffed, he's leg cuffed, he's ankle cuffed, and he dies in the space of 4 minutes. All the police officers get up and walk away. Not a single officer is suspended. Not a single officer is arrested. 5 years later, a family campaigning for justice in the midst of their grief are told not one officer will face charges. Then the family receives news of a public inquiry. The family hope it will reveal the truth, but it's not justice. So that Tuesday, a Police Scotland Chief Constable Livingstone issued a statement saying he is shocked and distressed over the ongoing events in the United States and has enforced that they do not reflect the policing style of the force in Scotland. The Chief Constable spoke out to condemn racism in all of its forms, as well as praise the positive relationship in the Scottish public have with their police officers. However, Mr. Anwar claims police forces, whether they be in USA or UK, have a history of following textbook approach when dealing with the death of a black person in custody. He said this involves criminalizing the behavior of the dead man, stigmatizing him, stereotyping him, and then as a result, justifying that death. Look back in the UK or the USA, and in each of these situations, it's usually the black man that's to blame for his own death, said Mr. Anwar. It's never anything to do with the excessive force used, never to do with the disproportionate and illegitimate force used on that black man. Always, for some reason, the black man is held responsible. Mr. Anwar said that since 1969 there have been 3,000 deaths in police custody in the UK, yet not a single successful prosecution of a police officer. That begs the question, why not? Mr. Anwar also continued there was a myth that persists in Scotland that somehow racism does not impact here, that we're all Jock Tamson's bairns. However, he added, the bottom line here is that when you scratch the surface, racism rises to the top. Racist attacks are at the highest level ever. The targets may well change, but the targets are still racism. Whether it's Islamophobia, anti-Semitic, whether it's against Eastern Europeans or asylum seekers, the target still remains the same. It remains racism, yet there is a denial. He may be regarded as one of Scotland's highest profile and most robust anti-racism campaigners. However, as a Scottish-based lawyer of Pakistani background, 52-year-old, by the way, I can't believe he's 52, he looks like 38, hello? Mr. Anwar admits that he feels fear at raising the racism here, and it's personally against him. The current rector of the Glasgow University says he has never once publicly complained about racism against him in the legal system. However, he said that doesn't mean racism in the legal profession doesn't exist. The reason he doesn't raise it, he says, is because he knows it will be shut down, excused, or he will be told he is playing the race card or being far too sensitive. Mr. Anwar said until Scotland faces up to its history as part of British slave trade, the cities that were built on it, and the human misery this brought, he feels underlying racism will persist. While he believes racism was invented to justify colonial rule and slavery, he said it's almost as if society from a white privilege perspective had decided everything's moved on and everything is resolved. He said the reality was, however, that when BAME, Black Asian Minority Ethnic, parents send their children out to school every day, they worry if they'll receive racial abuse or worry if they'll be stopped and searched by police. Parents worry that when their children grow up and sit their exams and apply for jobs, that they will be discriminated against. I always tell Black, Asian, ethnic, minority students when I'm lecturing to them that you will have to work 10 times harder to succeed, he said. You will spend a lifetime looking over your shoulder and low betide if you raise the issue of racism. So of course, what's happening in USA has struck a chord with the BAME communities far more than anyone else. A lot of my white friends also feel anger and anguish, but if you happen to be from a community that feels racism every day, we are looking in utter shock and bemusement because we are wondering what's happening on our own turf. Mr. Anwar said His message to anyone wanting to stand in solidarity with George Floyd and to fight against racism and injustice is to start looking at what's happening in your own country. He added that people could start with Sheku Bayoh. He said the bottom line here is, so as long as black people are being murdered for the color of their skin, so as long as our people are being abused, stigmatized and criminalized, stereotyped to their death, then why should we stop talking about racism? The strength from this that can be drawn is groups, organizations, individuals, and communities uniting, saying that we are not the enemy. Don't be divided, stand together. And here they list 10 things that need to say about racism. They are: racist murders between 2000 and 2013, the per capita rate of murders with a known or suspected racist element in Scotland was higher than in the rest of the UK, 1.8 murders per million people in the population compared to 1.3. 2. Racist violence. There were 4,807 racist incidents recorded by the police in 2013 to 2014, which is a 3.9% increase from 2012 to 2013. This is approximately 92 per week and is almost certainly the only tip of the iceberg. According to the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, racial hate crime remains the most commonly reported hate crime in Scotland, with 3,875 charges reported in 2014 to 2015, or nearly 75 per week. Poverty. In the 3 years leading to 2013, poverty was significantly higher for minority ethnic groups, with racial inequality cited as one of the contributors to the widening gap between the richest and poorest in the country. Unemployment. Those from non-white minority ethnic groups are unemployed at a higher rate than those from white ethnic groups. Public sector discrimination. 2011 to 2012 figures showed that for local authority jobs, even after the interview stage, white candidates were almost twice as likely to be appointed as BME candidates. Employment discrimination. Department for Work and Pensions research showed a person with a BME surname had to send an application away 16 times to achieve a successful response, compared to the 9 times for someone with a white name, even though they were submitting the same application. Education. While at school leaving age, non-white minority ethnic pupils are overall outperforming white ethnic pupils. They are underrepresented in higher education, and their educational attainment does not necessarily result in appropriate advantages in the job market. Elected office. Despite constituting 4% of the population, non-white minority ethnic backgrounds are underrepresented in politics. Housing. Research has shown that non-white minority ethnic communities are overrepresented in private renting, but underrepresented in home ownership and social housing, leaving groups more vulnerable to unstable letting and more expensive rents. Prejudice. 22% of people in Scotland feel that there is sometimes a good reason to be prejudiced against certain groups. 90% of those from a non-white minority ethnic group reported experiencing discrimination, compared to 6% of those from a white ethnic group. So, according to a 5-based organization that tackles inequalities and social justice, racial inequality has always been there in Scotland and requires continual effort to address it. Fife Centre for Equalities manager Nina Monday, not Monday like Monday, Tuesday, but Monday with a U, said it was not possible for one single government policy or document to wave it away. She said attitudes towards black people in particular had been entrenched too long, and she traces these attitudes back to Britain's colonial slave trade. People don't like to go back to the slavery issue, she said, but for too long people have been treating black people or people of different colors as commodities that they can sell or buy, and people are conditioned to think that somehow they are not the same as us. I think that's the problem. People think they don't have the same rights as us. What I continue to highlight in Fife and Scotland is the discrimination that happens at school and further and higher education and continues on to employment. We are trying everything we can to make people understand we all have equal capacities if all given the same opportunities. I think color still remains a factor no matter how far people think we've gone beyond that issue. Color does not affect how we treat one another, how we behave to one another. It is important to have that conversation in an honest way. It's not trying to portray Scotland or other places as a racist country. I agree with her. I hope that I didn't go too far from the main topic, which is Sheku Bayoh's death, and that no one has been charged. But I wanted to talk about this and tell you this because I think that everything that his family and their solicitor has said and done needs to be heard and spread even more. People need to hear this. Racism is a problem. It does exist, and it exists in Scotland too, and in many places around the world. One thing I am a bit disappointed about is that I couldn't find much information on who Sheku Bayoh was. Like, how was he as a person? What was his favorite color, his favorite animal, or his favorite food? What did he do during his free time? I personally feel like this case is focusing a lot on the racism aspect, which, I don't blame them, but they are not focusing a lot on Sheku Bayoh himself as a person, if you know what I mean. If there were more stories about who he was and how he treated other people or his children, and stories about him or things like that to humanize him, then people might sympathize more and see him more as human. Although this is only like to help people sympathize, I think that people on their own should already see other people as humans as well and equal, but some people do need that realization. They need to see he is someone's father, someone's husband, someone's child, and not just another name added to the Black Lives Matter list. So that is the case of Sheku Bayoh. Comment down below what you think about this case. Let me know your opinions, what you think, and have a nice day. Please be kind to other people. Treat them how you want to be treated. And I hope to see you here next time. Bye!
Down the years it's been a ride, and now I'm sorry I want more, it's not in tonight. And on as we go we seem to fight, but baby that's just the way we love, and only in the dark